If you will turn to Matthew 14, we're going to begin at verse 22. And I left John because Matthew had a few more details about this incident than John did. I have given you the parallel passages where this same miracle is recounted in Mark 6, beginning at verse 45, and John 6, beginning at verse 16. And I would encourage you to read those. Last time we talked about when Christ fed the 5,000. That was a wonderful lesson, and I've hardly quit thinking about it, how the Lord could minister that way, and yet how he laid that responsibility on the disciples. And he said to those 12 men, you feed this crowd. And then when they said, we don't have enough money, he said, well, do you have any bread? Go look. So are your resources sufficient? Not even close. But then after he did that, that disorderly crowd that he was merciful to and fed wanted to make him king because they wanted the food. I think this was part of the disciples' agenda. And so Jesus sent them away. He took them to the shore, said, get in this boat and go to Capernaum. That's the next place. On this map, I've put a little tiny map on your sheet. Bethsaida is up here in the yellow at the north of the Sea of Galilee. And he sent them to Capernaum, which is actually kind of the next town. On the Sea of Galilee, that's about 4.5 miles. So he's sending them not very far away. And I don't think they were happy, because they wanted him to be king as well. Well, if you'll look at Matthew 14, verse 22 says, immediately Jesus constrained or made his disciples get in a ship and go before him to the other side while he sent the unruly multitude away. And I don't know how he did that, except he had authority, and when he spoke with it, they left. And verse 23, when Christ had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when evening, the Greek word is nightfall or dark, was come, he was there alone. You know, we're looking at things about Jesus to help us learn or reconsider things about Christ. And one thing I thought of as I studied was, he sure prayed a lot, didn't he? Why'd he pray so much? He already did only the Father's will. He already taught truth. He already helped people with a heart of love and compassion. He may have been teaching us, or maybe we could turn that around. Why did Jesus always do the Lord's will and minister to people and teach truth? It was because he prayed. But now look at verse 24. The ship is now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary or against them. We got this little ship being buffeted by waves. You may have paddled the Caney River or the Harpeth, but I will tell you, when you did that, you went downstream. You weren't rowing against the current. And they are rowing against the current. John tells us in his account, the sea rose up by reason of the great wind that blew. There are now waves. You know, all around the Sea of Galilee was mountains. And the Sea of Galilee is almost the lowest lake on earth. The Dead Sea wins that honor. So the difference in elevation was a difference in temperature, and winds could just, and still kick up today, just instantly almost. And John also tells us they had rowed about 25 or 30 furlongs, which would be almost 4 miles, which would be almost the distance between these two cities. But are they close to Capernaum? Where are they? In the middle. They have gone from there, going to there, and they are in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. Now, I just thought when I read that, I've never been to the Sea of Galilee, but I have sure felt like that on a lot of days. I am rowing, and I'm only going in the wrong direction. This is a hard thing. They had a hard circumstance. And Mark tells us in his passage, when Jesus was alone on the land praying, he saw them toiling in rowing. Now, if he was on a mountain and the moon was out, he could have seen the boat. But I think that was his God eyes, that he saw how hard they were working. And I didn't look up the word toiling because I thought I knew what that meant. But it means to be, actually it's from the root that means to be tortured. It means to torment or to vex. Not only are they not able to do this rowing, it is getting to them. It is making them very unhappy. Now, they are unhappy because there are three things about Jesus that they didn't know, and because I think sometimes we forget them, I put those blanks on your sheet to write down if you have something to write with. First of all, they didn't realize that Jesus could see them. I don't know if it was the full moon or if it was his God eyes, but he could see them. Does Jesus see you? Well, we all believe that. And yet I know how many times in a trial I have felt like, Lord, I'm just alone. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. That'd make a good song, wouldn't it? Nobody knows but Jesus. That's right. He does. Sometimes we don't consider that. Not only could he see them, he was up there praying for them. We're told in Hebrews that Jesus ever lives to make intercession or pray for us. He still does that. Have you had a thought this morning that Jesus was praying for you? I had one of those scary thoughts, and then I thought, oh, Jesus is praying for me. And I was encouraged. And then the third thing was that he is coming to their rescue. Hebrews also tells us, Jesus said, I will never leave you or forsake you. I will never, no, never, never, assuredly not. I love it in the Amplified Bible. There is no way I'm going to leave you toiling and not come to you. Ladies, Christ gives us a religion from a God who cares. And all other religions want you to do things to try to get God to notice you and care. You know, I think I know some of the trials that everybody in this room faces. But I also know that God sees you, he cares about you, and he is going to help you. That, praise the Lord, it is not just the pagan people who bow down to idols and spin prayer wheels or do rituals. It is evangelicals who feel like by going to church or giving money, they will get God's attention and it will be good for them. Well, look at verse 25. It says, in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them, walking on the sea. I'm going to put Jesus up here. The fourth watch of the night is 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Now, he's been praying since it got dark. He's been awake the previous day, ministering to the unruly crowd, healing them and giving them food. He's dealing with the disciples. He hasn't slept. How do you do when you haven't slept? You think I'm sweet, you ought to see me when I haven't slept. Well, I have always, since I was a child, thought, why did Jesus wait so long to come to him? There they were being tortured, trying to row against a wind, and they are only going backwards. Why did he let that happen? I think he needs to teach these men to obey him even when they don't see him. And ladies, that's our lesson. You read the book of Acts. Were these guys going to need to obey him even when he was not visible? So he's teaching them. His delay is purposeful. It's not accidental or negligent. Then in verse 26, when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a spirit!" And they cried out in fear. I put the Greek word for spirit on your sheet because that looks, phantasma, looks very much like an English word. What does it look like? Phantom. All right? Literally a creature of the imagination, a dream or a spirit appearance. Now, I found something that helped me greatly to understand this, and it is an old commentary written by Jewish men, only translated into English in the 1920s. That's a commentary on the New Testament based on what they believed from the Talmud. The Talmud was all the religious rules that had become their religion. That's what the Jewish leaders taught. You don't carry anything on the Lord's Day. You can't even carry a handkerchief from one room to another. Oh, but you could wear the handkerchief and then it would be all right. And all these things about what's clean and what's not clean. This huge amount of laws. And this is what religion was. And if there was ever a group that tried to get God's attention by doing things, it was that group. And they thought they did. This was very prevalent on Jewish thought. And in the Talmud, there are several references about seeing spirits on the sea. Seeing the spirit of dead people, seeing sea monster spirits. In fact, the Jews of Jesus' day did not like the sea. And I think they were delighted when John penned Revelation 21, the new heaven and the new earth, and there was no more sea. That would have thrilled the people. It's not just from they didn't like it because of Jonah. They didn't like it. That helps me understand why these men who had spent this time with Jesus, if they saw him coming, why they responded in this way. And I had the thought, 1,000 years from now, archaeologists will pull up pictures of Americans and say, what happened in 2020? They all started wearing masks. But see, that was in our culture. And that's why we did that. This is deep in the disciples. Do you remember even after he was resurrected, when he appeared in the room, what did they say? They were afraid. They said, oh, it's a spirit. It's a ghost. Luke 24:36 and following. And he said, guys, touch me. A spirit doesn't have flesh and bones. See, this was very deep in them, so they are just kind of doing what's normal. But verse 27, straightway, immediately, Jesus spoke to them and said, be of good cheer. It is I. Be not afraid. 3 things I love. Be of good cheer, which does not mean cheer up. Be of good cheer is a choice, not a feeling. And you get it when you obey Jesus. And then he said, it is I. In the Greek is exactly what Jesus said in John 18 when he was being arrested. He said, "Who are you looking for?" They said, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he said, it's translated, "It is I am he," or "it is I," but it's the same as "I am." He said, "I am," the God name. What happened to that crowd who came to arrest him when he said that? I mean, this is a word of power. He says, "Choose to be cheerful because I am." That's a word of power. And then he says to them, "Don't be afraid." They have just been terrified. Would he command them to do something that was impossible for them to do? No. So that's a potential. Well, instead of being frightened by the circumstance, they're going to be encouraged by Christ. And then here comes the only place in Scripture where we know about what Peter did. No, none of the other Gospels have it. Verse 28, Peter answered Jesus and said, "Lord, if it's you," actually that could equally be translated since it's you, which makes a little more sense to my name. "If it's you, tell me to come unto you on the water." And I was amused reading what people write about this. And many people say this was a bad thing that Peter asked for. And it just showed how impulsive he was to speak without thinking. Well, he was impulsive. And they say it was a sin. But I know that's not true because verse 29, what did Jesus say to him? Come. Did Jesus ever tell anybody to sin? Ever lead anybody in the wrong direction? Well, Peter, I have to love him. For everything I see he did wrong, I see things in myself. It's like he said, "Since it's you, could I have some proof? Let me ask for something that's never happened in the history of the world." Let me ask if man can walk on water. And Christ says, "Come," and he does not rebuke Peter for asking this. And so the end of verse 29, when Peter stepped out of the ship, what'd he do? Walked on the water, because where was he going? He was going to Jesus. Now I'm going to use the word God for Jesus here. And his eyes were on Jesus, and he was doing it. Now, whatever else you're going to say about Peter, you got to say nobody else ever did this. And he did this. Peter, keep your eyes on God. That's what faith is, keeping your eyes on God. Verse 30, but what does Peter see now? How do you see the wind?
It could be putting up water.
It was the waves the wind was putting up. We don't see the wind, we only see the effects of the wind, blowing trees or blowing debris. When he saw the wind, "Oh, Peter, this situation has changed." And now it is worse than when you were afraid of Jesus, when you thought he was a spirit. I read a sweet story about a little girl who, in a thunderstorm, said to her mother, "Mommy, would you sleep with me tonight?" And Mommy wisely said, "Honey, God will take care of you in the storm. I have to sleep in Daddy's room." And after a pause, the little girl said, "Daddy's a big sissy." But you know, if I put my eyes on my problem, on my circumstance, it will turn the bravest woman in here to a big sissy. Because we respond based on where our eyes are. Now, this is hard for me because I naturally think of the bad. I just do. Everything I look at, I see something that I could fix and maybe have a plan to do it. But what does Hebrews tell us? Let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus. But Peter is looking at the wind. And verse 30 says, when he saw it was boisterous or strong, what happened again? Two things. He was afraid. And then he began to, Joe, you were correct. He began to sink. You mean true believers can begin to sink? Well, I will say for Peter, his faith, his eyes didn't stay where they needed to be, but his brain knew where they needed to be. And he prays a very wonderful prayer, which is probably the shortest prayer in the Bible, but it is inclusive of much. First of all, he's praying to the right person, right? He's praying to Christ. He didn't turn around to his brother and say, Andrew, throw me a rope. He prayed to Jesus. It clearly expressed his need. What did he need? How long does it take you to sink if you stepped out into a swimming pool? I'm surprised he got the words out. Let me ask you a biblical question. Could Peter swim? I hear yes and no. After the resurrection, he did. Well, why doesn't Peter just swim back to the boat? Fear paralyzes you. It really does. Well, my hands get sweaty just reading about this. Did Peter seem to think Christ would help him? I think he did. Do we think Christ will help us? I know he'll help me if he wants to. Now, he always wants to help me. He doesn't always want to help me the way I want him to help me. That's the if. Well, let's look at 31. How quickly did he answer? Immediately, Jesus stretched for his hand and caught him. If Christ had hesitated a split second, it would have been too late, wouldn't it? And he doesn't just make Peter come back up on top of the water as he had done when he was walking. He just spoke. He didn't even speak. He touched him. He reached out. Peter felt that strong hand touching him. The Greek says he caught him, and it means it's a word where the action is all on the part of the person doing the catching. Peter did not get his hand. Christ got Peter's hand. So now the whole weight of sinking Peter is on Jesus' arm. That sounds safe, doesn't it? And that verse continues, Jesus caught him, and then he does rebuke him to some extent. He says, "O thou of little faith, wherefore or why did you doubt?" I am confident that what Peter did was okay, because if Jesus wanted to rebuke him, he would have said, "Peter, why did you ask me to do that?" And that's not the question. He didn't say, "Peter, why did you try to venture something that was impossible?" He says, "Peter, why didn't you trust me when you were doing it? Why did you doubt?" Has Jesus made his power clear to the disciples at this point? Thousands of times. So how could Peter doubt? Same way we doubt, I guess. And Jesus actually called Peter a name. Little faith in the Greek is one word. He said, "Oh, little faith." You know, the book of Revelation tells us in eternity we are given a white stone that has a new name written on it. Suppose the stone we get and the name we get was descriptive of our life on earth. Well, I would get a little faith too. Did Peter think of himself as having a little bit of faith? No. In fact, one time when Jesus says to his disciples, all of you are going to be scattered tonight, Peter said, not me. I'm sticking with you. And the word Jesus used in the second question, why did you doubt? It means a divided mind. Do you ever have a divided mind? You want to lose weight, but you want to eat Oreos. Is that a good example? There's something that affects our divided mind and obscures our view of God, and it is our feelings, how we feel about particular situations. Peter wanted to, but he wanted to be safe, and he wanted it to be his way. If Jesus came to you and said, why are you in a twit about what you're facing? What would you say? The issue there is, why do you have so little faith, and why do you doubt? I've never let you down. I've been praying for you. I mean, when I say I'm praying for you, that's maybe okay. But if Jesus says, I'm praying for you, that's remarkable. One pastor had this to say about doubt. He said, first of all, it's inexcusable to think that my little situation could nullify all of the promises of God in His Word about I will never leave you or forsake you. I will always be there for you. It shows that we are ignorant of God's character, just like our mother Eve, who in the garden, when faced with temptation, thought, oh, God's trying to keep something from me. God's not good. Or like old Jacob, when his sons had deceived him about where Joseph was, and he thought his favorite son was dead. And they came back and said, the ruler of Egypt has Simeon and wants us to take Benjamin. He said, oh no, Joseph is not. Simeon is not. And you want to take Benjamin. All these things are against me. I'll confess, ladies, some days I just think, Lord, does everything have to be against me? Could I quit toiling against the wind? Could something go right? That's ignorance of God's character. And then it's forgetfulness that God is in control. Who is working all things together for our good. And I think we are a witness to others that you just can't trust God when we do this. Well, look at verse 32. When they were coming to the ship, Peter and Jesus, what happened? Wow, that'd be neat to see. A strong wind and it just cuts off. And if the wind stopped, I guess it took a few seconds for the waves to level out. And I'm thrilled when I read that. What a wonderful miracle. And then I see where Jesus put them, just back in the ordinary ship. Oh, no, back to ordinary life. John tells us at this point, immediately, the ship was at the land where they went. They had been here, and Jesus beamed them up to Capernaum. Jesus has shown power over gravity, over storms, and over distance. Far as I know, this is the only time Jesus ever beamed himself anywhere. And you know, he walked all around Galilee. I mean, he walked. And he never cut across the Sea of Galilee again, nor did he ever just make himself be where he wanted to be. This was a miracle just for those guys in the boat. All the miracles they've seen, he was doing for somebody else. Now, they saw them, but they were for somebody else. This miracle was for them. So, do we get it? In my current storm, do I feel like I have a health crisis that cannot be resolved? An emotional crisis, overriding grief, depression? Is there a difficult person I just cannot tolerate one more second? Hope you're not married to that person. Is there a financial need you just cannot meet? You have to say, God sees this. God is like Jesus, 100% caring. He is 100% able. He is 100% working on my behalf because he never forsakes his own. So I don't have to be beaten down. Isn't that wonderful? I don't know if this lesson's for you or not. It might just be for me. Well, let's think about it. Look at the last verse, verse 33. How did it affect the disciples? They that were in the boat came and worshiped him. This is the first time the Bible says the disciples worshiped Jesus. Now, the wise men worshiped Jesus when he was a baby, but nobody in his ministry has worshiped him until now, because they finally are seeing something. This is not just the prophet we thought would come. This is not even just the Messiah King we've been hoping for. This guy is, what do they say? The Son of God. Finally, they put Jesus in the God category. Now, they waver on this, but at least they have seen it once. As I have spoken this morning, I wonder, can all of you think of some time you have doubted? Is that such a common experience that we think it? All right, let me ask you, was there any good excuse for doubting God? Besides, you felt like it. Did anything good come from doubting God? Well, Christ called Peter little faith. Let's think just a minute about the weaknesses of little faith. I see in Peter, little faith seems to have too high an opinion of himself and his faith. I think that's one. Little faith seems to be affected by the wind, by what's swirling around. I can be real spiritual until a problem comes up, and then I'm more affected by that. And little faith seemed to really focus on its problem as it was sinking, but I don't blame little faith for that. But that doesn't help you. The good news about little faith is that little faith is faith. Like Peter, little faith preys immediately upon failure instead of going on in the failure. And apparently, little faith is enough because Jesus never forsakes his own. Well, I won't be able to let go of this one either. I wonder what the Lord has spoken to you, and I hope he has given you some application in your life.